Imagine waking up today. It's March 18th, 2026. You open your phone, and your news feed is it's basically a wall of sirens.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, just total chaos.
Exactly. I mean, there's really only one word dominating every single headline right now, and that's Iran.
Right.
The Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed. We are watching this active, incredibly high-stakes military conflict unfolding in real time between Israel, the U.S., and Iran.
And the ripple effects are they're staggering.
Oh, they're everywhere. Global supply chains are in this state of cascading failure. You look at the commodities markets, and crude oil is spiking to numbers we haven't seen in, well, decades.
Liquid natural gas shipments are totally halted.
Yeah, and it's not just energy, it's massive disruptions in the transit of everything from helium to agricultural fertilizers. It's a geopolitical powder keg.
It really is. And, the natural human instinct when confronted with a crisis of this magnitude is to just focus on the immediate, tangible things.
Right, you want to look at the missiles.
Exactly. You want to look at the chessboard, identify where the pieces are moving today, and track the tactical stuff. We naturally gravitate toward the smoke on the horizon because it's visible.
But, I mean, tracking the trajectory of a ballistic missile doesn't actually tell you anything about the ground it was launched from, right?
Precisely. It tells you nothing about the foundational instability of that launch pad.
Which brings us perfectly to the mission of our deep dive today. Welcome to the Topic Lens. In our Politics and Society section today, we are going to step completely away from the 24-hour news cycle.
Good, because it's just a fog of war out there right now.
It really is. I mean, the headlines are screaming about the unprecedented death of Iran's 86-year-old supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
Right, which happened just days into this active conflict.
Yeah, and the immediate succession of his son, Mujtaba Khamenei. It is a staggering amount of information for anyone to process.
It's historically unprecedented.
So, we're taking a massive stack of sources for you today. We've got declassified historical documents, linguistic mappings, deep demographic data, and recent on-the-ground sociological reports.
And we are going to synthesize all of it.
Exactly. The goal here, and we always try to do this, is to strip away all political biases. Whether it's left-wing or right-wing commentary, we're ignoring it. We're just reporting what the sources say neutrally to understand the actual foundational DNA of Iran.
Because the real reason this entire geopolitical apparatus is exploding right now isn't just about foreign policy.
No, it's about a country that is quite literally dying of thirst from the inside out.
Yeah. To comprehend the headlines you're reading this morning, you really have to invert your perspective.
How so?
Well, you have to look backward. You have to look at the deep history, the incredibly convoluted internal power structures, and these immense boiling domestic pressures.
The pressures that eventually fractured them from the inside out.
Exactly. The pressures that culminated in the massive, violently suppressed uprisings of late 2025.
Right. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because diving into the demographic files from our source packet, the very first thing that jumps out is how fundamentally flawed the Western lens is when looking at Iran.
Oh, it gets it wrong almost immediately.
It really does. Like, if you ask a casual observer to describe the country, the default mental image is often this monolithic, Arab, uniformly religious state in the Middle East.
Which is just factually incorrect on almost every level.
Right. The data paints a picture of a massive, incredibly diverse empire. Just looking at the geography, I mean, we are talking about a landmass of roughly 1.6 million square kilometers.
That's massive.
To put that into perspective for you listening, that is roughly 5 times the size of Norway.
Wow.
Or slightly larger than the state of Alaska.
And the physical geography alone dictates so much of its history. Iran is essentially this imposing fortress.
Right, it's surrounded by mountains.
Yeah, the massive Zagros Mountains to the west, the Alborz Mountains to the north, and then you have these vast, unforgiving deserts in the central interior.
So it's hard to invade.
Historically, yes. This topography allowed them to maintain a highly distinct cultural identity, basically insulated from all the empire sweeping across the flatter plains of the Middle East.
And that cultural identity is the first major misconception we need to clear up, right?
Absolutely. Iranians are not Arabs.
Say that again, because I think people always conflate the two.
Iranians are not Arabs. Equating the two is a fundamental historical, linguistic, and geopolitical error.
The demographic breakdown in our sources is fascinating on this. Arabic-speaking people make up only about 2% of Iran's total population.
Just 2%. And they're mostly concentrated in the southwest, right along the border with Iraq.
So if 98% of the country isn't Arab, Who actually lives in this fortress?
Well, out of a population estimated between 87 and 92 million people, making it the second most populous nation in the Middle East. By the way, the dominant group is Persian.
Making up roughly 61%, right?
Exactly. And the language they speak, Farsi, provides this perfect window into their distinct heritage.
Yeah, the linguistic roots in the sources really blew my mind.
Farsi is an Indo-European language. It is not a Semitic language like Arabic or Hebrew.
Right, and when you look at core vocabulary, the connections are astonishing. Like the Farsi word for brother is baradar,
Yeah.
and the word for mother is madar.
And name is name. Star is Sitara.
It sounds so incredibly close to English or German.
Because they share the exact same ancient linguistic family tree. Structurally, Persian shares deeper roots with Norwegian or English than it does with the Arabic spoken just a few miles away across the Persian Gulf.
That is wild. And that Persian majority is just the center, right? It's a huge patchwork.
Oh, absolutely. It's a vibrant, complex patchwork of distinct ethnicities. In the Northwest, you have a massive Azerbaijani population.
Who speak a Turkic language, I read.
Correct. They make up about 16% of the country. Then in the Western Mountains, you have the Kurds making up about 10%.
Plus you have Baluchis in the southeast near Pakistan.
Yeah, and Lurs, Turkmen, Galakis. I mean, Iran is not a homogeneous nation-state in the modern European sense. It is a multi-ethnic empire that has been forcefully centralized under a single authority in Tehran.
And that centralization brings us to this really profound contradiction in the sociological data.
The disconnect between the state and the people.
Exactly. Because if you watch Iranian state media or, listen to the Friday prayer sermons they broadcast, the state projects this image of a deeply orthodox, fanatically religious society.
Uniformly marching in step with the clerics.
Right. But if I look at footage from Tehran over the years or look at the leaked metrics, internet usage, underground culture, it looks incredibly modern. Are we confusing the regime with people?
We absolutely are. What the data actually reveals is a massive, gaping chasm between the state apparatus and the society it governs.
How big of a chasm are we talking?
Huge. The state operates as an uncompromising, strict theocracy. But the society is, well, they're living in a different century. Large segments of the urban population do not actively practice traditional religious rituals.
I read that mosque attendance for daily prayers is remarkably low compared to neighboring countries.
It is.
Yeah.
Instead, you have this highly educated population deeply plugged into global culture via VPNs, consuming Western media, music, you name it.
The education statistics really jumped out at me. Over 60% of university students in Iran are women.
Which is an incredible statistic.
It is. You have this massive demographic of highly educated, sophisticated women in STEM, literature, the arts who are simultaneously subjected to mandatory hijab laws and severe legal restrictions.
The cognitive dissonance has to be staggering.
It must be, and it fuels this profound internal alienation.
The sources note that younger generations really view themselves as the heirs to an ancient, sophisticated civilization. They look back to the Persian Empire.
To the architectural marvels of Persepolis.
Yeah, and the philosophical poetry of Rumi and Hafez. They contrast that rich cosmopolitan history with their current reality.
They almost view themselves as an occupied nation, don't they?
That's exactly how they phrase it. A proud ancient culture currently held hostage by a strict clerical regime that doesn't represent their historical identity.
And just to interject here for you, the listener, as we navigate this data, we are analyzing these sentiments based strictly on verified sociological surveys and the demands of the protest movements.
We aren't endorsing a regime change or taking a side.
Right. Our goal is just to impartially report the reality of this internal friction. The vast disconnect between the rulers and the ruled is a documented fact, and it's critical to understanding their fragility in 2026.
Absolutely, because to understand the state's fragility, we have to actually explore the system the clerics built.
Yeah, if the population is increasingly secular, why is the state governed by such strict religious law?
Right. How did this happen?
So to understand the government in Tehran today and its rivalries with neighbors like Saudi Arabia, we need a quick theological baseline.
We do. And the terminology used in the Western press is often, well, wildly inaccurate.
Let's start with the most misunderstood term, Sharia. You constantly hear pundits use Sharia as if it is a specific extremist sect of Islam.
Which is fundamentally incorrect. Sharia is not a sect.
What is it then?
It translates roughly to the clear, well-trodden path to water. In practice, It is the overarching Islamic religious law and ethical framework.
Okay.
It's the moral code derived from the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. It covers everything from daily prayers to complex financial contracts.
So every practicing Muslim, regardless of their sect, follows Sharia to some degree in their personal life.
Exactly. It's the underlying framework. The actual division, the sectarian split that defines Middle Eastern geopolitics, is between Sunni and Shia.
And looking at the history, this division isn't about different holy books, right?
No, they share the same Quran.
It's entirely rooted in a political succession crisis that occurred in 632 AD.
Right. The year 632 AD is the inflection point. The Prophet Muhammad died in Medina without leaving a universally accepted, explicit blueprint for who should succeed him.
So the community, the Ummah, had a massive crisis of authority.
Huge. How do they resolve it? They split into two factions based on their philosophy of leadership.
Okay, let's look at the first faction.
The majority faction, who become the Sunnis, making up roughly 85 to 90% of Muslims today, believed leadership should be determined by consensus.
So they basically wanted to vote on it, sort of.
In a way, yes. They believed the leader, or caliph, should be chosen from the community based on competence and piety. They selected Abu Bakr, a respected elder and companion of the Prophet.
But there was a smaller faction that fundamentally rejected that consensus model.
Yes, this minority believed leadership was not a matter of public election, but of divine right and bloodline.
They thought it had to stay in the family.
Exactly. They argued the Prophet had implicitly designated his cousin and son-in-law, Ali, as his rightful successor. This group became known as the Shiite Ali, the party of Ali.
Which over time was just shortened to Shia.
Correct.
And reading through the texts, this disagreement didn't stay a polite debate over constitutional law,
Oh no. It escalated into devastating violence.
culminating in an event that seems to define the entire psychological framework of Shia Islam, the Battle of Karbala in 680 AD.
Karbala is the absolute core trauma of the Shia faith. Decades after the initial split, Ali's son, Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, led a small band of roughly 70 relatives and loyal companions to challenge the ruling Sunni caliphate.
Because Hussein viewed them as corrupt and illegitimate.
Exactly. And in the desert of Karbala, in modern-day Iraq, Hussein's tiny group was intercepted by a massive army of thousands.
They were cut off from water, right?
Cut off from water for days.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, Hussein and his followers were brutally massacred. Hussein was beheaded.
The accounts are just visceral, and our sources note this wasn't just a military defeat, it became a theological cornerstone.
Millions of Shia Muslims gather every year for the observance of Ashura to mourn Hussein's death. They weep, they beat their chests.
It infused the entire religion with this profound narrative of martyrdom.
Yes, righteous suffering and the eternal moral duty to resist unjust, tyrannical authority, no matter the odds.
And that narrative is absolutely essential to understanding modern Iranian foreign policy.
When the regime talks about resisting the U.S. or Israel today, they frequently invoke the imagery of Karbala. They cast themselves as Hussein, standing up to the overwhelming, unjust armies of the modern world.
It's a powerful psychological tool. So when trying to grasp the Sunni-Shia divide, you often hear Western analysts say, oh, it's like Catholics versus Protestants. Is that a useful framework for our deep dive today?
It is a helpful entry point. We have to push deeper into how the religions are actually organized.
Because that's where we see why it matters for Iran.
Right, like Catholics and Protestants, they share the same foundational text. But the most critical parallel for understanding the Iranian state is the organizational structure.
Which is highly hierarchical in Shia Islam.
Exactly. Twelver Shia Islam, which is the state religion of Iran, operates very much like the Catholic Church.
Whereas Sunni Islam is much more decentralized.
Right. In Sunni Islam, there isn't really a centralized transnational clergy. There's no pope figure who dictates theology for all Sunnis.
But in Twelver Shia Islam, you have this rigid structure of clerics. Let's break down that hierarchy, because it basically became the blueprint for the modern Iranian government.
At the foundation, you have seminary students. As they study for decades, they advance in rank. They become Hojat al-Islam, meaning authority on Islam.
And then?
The most learned scholars eventually achieve the rank of Ayatollah, meaning sign of God. And at the absolute pinnacle, you have a handful of grand Ayatollahs, known as Marja al-Taqlid, or sources of emulation.
So every practicing Twelver Shia must choose a living Grand Ayatollah and follow his rulings on daily life.
Yes, And critically, this isn't just a spiritual relationship, it is a financial one.
Right, the comes tax. The sources detail this religious tax where followers pay 20% of their surplus wealth directly to their chosen ayatollah.
Which means the Shia clerical establishment historically had massive independent streams of revenue.
They didn't rely on the state or the monarch at all.
Exactly. They had their own funding, a physical network of mosques, and an intensely loyal follower base.
Which gave them immense power.
You've pinpointed the exact mechanism. When you have a deeply respected, heavily funded hierarchy spread across every city and village, you don't just have a religion, you have the latent architecture of a parallel state.
Which brings us to the monumental question. How did this latent clerical architecture activate and take total control of a rapidly modernizing nation in the 20th century?
Because by mid-1900s, Iran was industrializing.
Yeah, they had a booming oil sector, a secularizing middle class. To understand how the clerics captured the state, our historical files indicate we have to look closely at the trauma of 1953.
You absolutely cannot understand the 1979 Islamic Revolution without first understanding Operation Ajax.
Let's get into 1953, because it's the original sin of modern U.S.-Iranian relations, isn't it?
It really is. In the early 1950s, Iran actually had a vibrant, albeit fragile, democratic system. They had a wildly popular secular nationalist prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh.
And Mossadegh had one primary objective, right?
To nationalize Iran's massive oil industry. At that time, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which we know today as BP, held a monopoly on Iranian oil.
And the British were extracting immense wealth while paying the Iranian government almost nothing in royalties.
Exactly. Mossadegh argued that Iranian resources should benefit the Iranian people. He successfully pushed the nationalization bill through Parliament.
And the British response was just devastating.
They orchestrated a total global embargo on Iranian oil. They parked warships in the Persian Gulf to prevent tankers from leaving. The economy went into a tailspin.
But the British realized they couldn't topple Mossadegh alone.
No, so they turned to the newly formed CIA in the United States. They argued that Mossadegh's instability might push Iran into the arms of the Soviet Union.
Which, during the Cold War, was the perfect leverage.
It was.
I was reading the declassified CIA operational files in our sources. It reads like a spy thriller, but with catastrophic real-world consequences.
The CIA dispatched an operative named Kermit Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's grandson, to Tehran with suitcases full of cash.
And the mechanics of the coup were shockingly brazen.
They literally bought off newspaper editors to print fake defamatory stories about Mossadegh. They bribed military officers.
They even hired street gangs from the bazaars to stage massive, violent fake protests.
They created an artificial environment of total chaos. And under the cover of that engineered anarchy, the military moved in, arrested Mossadegh, and crushed the democratic government.
And in his place, they reinstated the monarch, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi.
Transforming him from a constitutional monarch into an absolute dictator, entirely beholden to Western interests.
And that event, that betrayal, implanted a profound, lasting paranoia in the Iranian psyche.
It proved to a whole generation, secular and religious alike, that the West's rhetoric about democracy was entirely hollow if it threatened their economic access to oil.
Right, so the Shah is back in power, he has Washington's backing, the CIA helps him set up his security forces, and he's suddenly flush with oil revenue. What does he do with it?
In the 1960s and 70s, he launches the White Revolution. It was this aggressive, top-down modernization program. He wanted to force Iran to become a Western-style, industrialized powerhouse overnight.
He mandated land reforms, granted women the right to vote, poured billions into infrastructure.
On paper, it sounds like a progressive renaissance.
But it sparked a revolution instead. Why?
Because the implementation was a disaster of corruption and inequality. The oil wealth did not trickle down. It pooled at the very top, creating an obscene wealth gap.
The elites in northern Tehran were living in extravagant luxury,
Driving European sports cars, attending lavish parties.
The 1971 Persepolis Party is the ultimate symbol of this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The Shah spent tens of millions of dollars throwing a party in the ruins of the ancient capital to celebrate 2,500 years of the monarchy.
They flew in food from Paris, imported 50,000 songbirds that mostly died in the desert heat.
All while rural villages nearby lacked basic electricity and running water.
It was a spectacular display of hubris. It deeply alienated the majority of the country. Plus, the rapid westernization felt like a cultural assault to the religious segments of society.
And if you wanted to protest this, if you were a student or a cleric, You couldn't just write an op-ed. You ran headfirst into Savak.
Savak was the Shah's secret police. Originally trained by the CIA and Israel's Mossad, they were infamous for their sheer brutality.
The sources detail horrific methods of torture in prisons like Evin.
They completely dismantled the secular liberal parties, crushed the Communist Tuta Party, eliminated independent labor unions. The Shah created a massive pressure cooker and welded the safety valves shut.
There was no legitimate outlet for political grievance. Which brings us to the explosion of 1979.
Yes.
Now, the common narrative in Western media often frames 1979 as an Islamic revolution right from the start, as if everyone woke up and wanted a strict theocracy.
Which the historical data totally refutes. The 1979 revolution was a massive, incredibly diverse coalition.
You had Marxist guerrillas, secular liberals, progressive students, bazaar merchants, and the clerics.
They hated each other's ideologies, but they shared one unifying goal. The Shah had to go.
So here's where it gets really interesting for me. If everyone was involved and it was this huge coalition, how did the clerics end up holding all the cards? How do they steal a revolution?
It comes down to the mechanics of a power vacuum. When the Shah fled in January 1979, the state apparatus collapsed. The secular liberals and communists had spent decades being decimated by Savak.
So they had ideas, but no national organizational structure.
Exactly. But the clerics did. We go back to that hierarchical structure we discussed earlier. Savak could ban a political party, but they couldn't shut down every mosque.
The mosques were the only physical spaces where people could still gather.
And at the center of this network was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, directing the revolution from exile in Paris.
The way Khomeini communicated is fascinating. It was essentially the first analog social media revolution.
He wasn't broadcasting on TV. He would call his deputies in Tehran via international telephone. They'd record his sermons.
And then take that master tape to the bazaars where they had banks of cassette duplicators.
Couriers would distribute the tapes to mosques nationwide. By the time the Shah fell, Khomeini was the undisputed logistical leader.
And once he returned to Tehran, the clerics moved with ruthless efficiency.
They had the street muscle militias that would become the Revolutionary Guard. They systematically turned on their revolutionary partners.
Brutal purges. They executed the communists, imprisoned the liberals, dismantled the very coalition that helped them win.
And having eliminated the opposition, Khomeini introduced a radical new theological doctrine, Vilayat-e-Faqih, or the guardianship of the Islamic jurist.
Which was a major shift, right? Because traditionally, Shia clerics were quietist.
Exactly. They believed political authority belonged only to the hidden imam, the 12th descendant of the prophet, who will return at the end of time. Until then, clerics should just advise.
But Khomeini completely flipped that script.
He argued that in the absence of the hidden imam, the most qualified Islamic jurist must hold absolute political authority to ensure the state follows Sharia.
And that became the constitutional foundation of the new Islamic Republic.
It's crucial to note, when Iranians voted in the 1979 referendum, many secularists thought they were voting for a system with Islamic values, like Christian Democrats in Europe.
They didn't realize they were voting for the absolute dictatorship of the clerics.
No, they did.
Which transitions us perfectly into examining the machine they actually built, because the government structure that emerged is deeply confusing to outsiders.
It is a hybrid state.
Yeah, it has elections, it has a parliament, a president, but no one calls it a democracy. How does it actually function?
It's best understood as a dual system. You have Republican institutions that look familiar, overlaid, and subordinated by unelected theocratic institutions.
Okay, let's map out the Republican side first. You have a president. In our current timeline of 2026, that's Masoud Pezeshkian.
He's elected by the public, appoints a cabinet, manages the economy, acts as the diplomatic face.
And you have a parliament, the Majlis, who draft legislation, so millions go to the polls.
Right. But here is the critical mechanism that strips it of true democratic power. The Guardian Council.
This is the ultimate bottleneck. Break down the Guardian Council for us.
It's an unelected body of just 12 men. 6 are senior clerics appointed by the supreme leader. The other 6 are civil jurists nominated by the head of the judiciary, who is also appointed by the supreme leader.
And this tiny, unaccountable group possesses the power of absolute vetting.
Meaning they decide who's even allowed to run for office. Before your name goes on a ballot, they investigate you for unwavering loyalty to the regime.
So if a candidate is too moderate or critical, they just disqualify them.
Routinely, they've disqualified thousands, including former presidents.
It's a brilliant, cynical system of control. You give the population a steering wheel so they feel like they're driving, but the Guardian Council controls the brakes, the transmission, and the destination.
You can vote, but only for regime-approved options. And their power doesn't stop there. They act as an ideological upper house.
They veto any law that contradicts Sharia.
Exactly.
And sitting at the absolute apex of this entire structure is the supreme leader. Which brings us to the breaking news of March 18th, 2026.
Ali Khamenei has died, and the state has elevated his son, Mojtaba Khamenei.
What exact powers has Mojtaba just inherited?
Absolute, unchecked authority. He's the commander-in-chief. He dictates foreign policy, the nuclear program. He appoints the head of the judiciary, state media, the Friday prayer leaders.
So the president is essentially just a highly visible administrator.
Yes. While Pezeshkian is on TV managing the diplomatic fallout of this war, he's just an administrator. The supreme leader and the theocratic institutions hold all the actual levers of survival.
Especially in a crisis like this, the military institutions just take the wheel.
And speaking of the military, we uncover another layer of this dual state, because the regime built a parallel military system as an insurance policy.
Why does a nation-state maintain two entirely separate military forces?
Institutional paranoia. When Khomeini seized power, he inherited the national military, the Artesh. But the Artesh had been trained and equipped by the U.S. under the Shah.
The clerics deeply distrusted them. They feared a coup.
So you can't disband the army because you have hostile neighbors like Iraq, but you can't trust them either.
What's the solution?
You strictly limit the Artesh's mandate to defending the geographic borders. But to protect the revolution itself, Khomeini created a fiercely loyal parallel force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
The IRGC. Their mandate isn't border defense, it's regime survival.
Exactly. To protect the regime from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And they answer directly to the supreme leader.
Over the past 4 decades, the IRGC has mutated into this staggering behemoth.
Ground forces, a navy using swarm tactics, an aerospace division that controls the ballistic missiles being fired in 2026.
But framing them purely as a military organization misses half the picture. The economic data is mind-boggling.
They are a massive corporate conglomerate wielding guns. They created an engineering wing called Qatam al-Anbiya.
They started securing massive, no-bid government contracts to build dams, highways.
And when state assets were privatized, IRGC front companies bought them up. They effectively swallowed the telecom sector, oil and gas, major import-export terminals.
They operate a shadow economy, completely immune to civilian oversight.
And internally, they command the Basij, a massive volunteer militia embedded in every neighborhood.
They act as the internal enforcers, morality policing, crushing protests.
But the IRGC doesn't just look inward. To understand how Iran is fighting this existential war in 2026 without regular troops, we have to look at their external wing, the elite Quds Force.
Historically commanded by figures like Qasem Soleimani, their mandate is unconventional warfare, right?
Intelligence operations cultivating non-state actors beyond Iran's borders. This brings us directly to the axis of resistance.
Let's map out that web, because looking at 2026, Iran is fighting the U.S. and Israel. When you're heavily sanctioned and facing a technological disadvantage, who do you turn to?
You pivot east. China has become the absolute economic bedrock for the regime.
Our sources track dark fleets of tankers moving over 1 million barrels of sanctioned oil every day to China.
That is the financial lifeline keeping them solvent.
Oh.
And militarily, their alliance with Russia has evolved massively since the Ukraine war in 2022.
Right. Iran provided Russia with thousands of Shahed suicide drones.
In exchange for advanced Russian military technology, fighter jets, air defense, cyber capabilities.
It's a deeply pragmatic alliance. But looking at the Middle East, there is a massive historical piece missing from this map as of early 2026.
The Assad regime in Syria.
Assad fell in December 2024. The geopolitical implications of that are staggering.
Syria wasn't just an ally. It was the vital logistical land bridge.
For decades, the Quds Force used Syrian bases to transit weapons from Tehran through Iraq to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
When Assad fell, that land bridge evaporated. Iran suddenly faced a logistical nightmare, leaving its frontline forces deeply exposed.
Which isolates those militias what the West calls Iranian proxies. I really want to interrogate that term.
We should. Lumping them all as proxies implies the supreme leader just pushes a button and a robot fires a missile.
Exactly, and the reality is much more nuanced. Let's start with the group closest to a true proxy, Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Hezbollah was literally willed into existence by the IRGC in 1982. They're deeply theologically loyal to the concept of velayat-e faqih.
Iran equipped them with over 100,000 rockets. They function as Iran's ultimate forward deterrent against Israel.
Though even Hezbollah has to balance Tehran's demands with their own domestic survival in Lebanon.
Okay, so Hezbollah is bound by theology, but what about Hamas in Gaza?
Hamas is entirely different. They're a Sunni Palestinian organization. There's no deep religious fealty to Tehran.
It's a ruthless, pragmatic geopolitical calculation.
Exactly. Hamas wants to fight Israel. Iran wants to fund anyone fighting Israel. So Iran provides funding and tech, but Hamas makes its own tactical decisions.
They are Iran-supported, not Iran-controlled. And then there are the Houthis in Yemen.
The Houthis are Zaidi Shia, a different branch entirely. They started as a local rebellion against Saudi interference.
And the IRGC saw a golden opportunity to bleed Saudi Arabia dry.
They provided advanced drone tech. But the Houthis act with an incredibly high degree of autonomy, fighting their own local war for dominance.
So why does a country with a crumbling economy spend billions arming all these militias?
The logic is a doctrine called forward defense, or strategic depth. They know they can't defeat the U.S. or Israel in a conventional war.
So you ensure the war never reaches your soil.
You fund this network to fight asymmetrical shadow wars thousands of miles away from your actual borders. You set fires in everyone else's house to protect your own.
And it worked for decades. But while they were maintaining this external empire, the house itself started to rot from the foundation.
The true catalyst for their extreme vulnerability in 2026 wasn't a failure of foreign policy. It was a catastrophic failure of basic domestic survival.
Let's talk about the environmental reality. Iran is quite literally running out of water.
It's a massive man-made catastrophe layered on top of climate change. Roughly 92% of all water consumed in Iran is used for agriculture.
92%, that is astronomically high.
And it's used so inefficiently. Instead of modern drip irrigation, they expand water-intensive crops like watermelons in the desert.
Using archaic flooding methods.
And the IRGC engaged in decades of scientifically unsound dam building, altering natural flows, while farmers dug millions of illegal wells.
Draining the ancient underground aquifers. I read the ground in Tehran is literally dropping several centimeters a year.
Land subsidence, yes, because the aquifers beneath the city are sucked dry, and the most tragic symbol is Lake Urmia.
It was once this massive lake, and now it's just a toxic salt pan.
The wind whips that salt up into toxic storms, destroying farmlands and causing respiratory issues.
So the country is drying up. How does the regime try to solve this?
They attempt to engineer their way out. They build massive desalination plants on the southern coast.
Sucking in seawater, removing the salt, creating toxic brine, and then pumping the fresh water inland.
Pumping millions of cubic meters, thousands of kilometers, up and over the Zagros Mountains. The electricity required is astronomical.
It causes rolling blackouts across major cities. It's an apocalyptic feedback loop.
And they do it because if the water runs out, millions of destitute farmers migrate to the cities, and starving populations eventually revolt.
Which brings us precisely to the explosion of December 2025.
Because layered on top of the water crisis was an economy that finally broke.
Years of sanctions, corruption, funding the proxy network, the national currency, the rial hyperinflated. Walk us through that uprising.
On December 28, 2025, the rial hit an unprecedented low against the dollar. Inflation skyrocketed overnight, pricing basic food out of reach.
And the spark didn't happen on a campus. It happened in the Grand Bazaar of Tehran.
The traditional merchants, the working-class bedrock of the revolution, they went on strike. They poured into the streets in fury.
And it spread like wildfire.
Within 48 hours, it spread to farmers in Isfahan, factory workers, university students, over 200 cities across all 31 provinces.
And the demands rapidly escalated from food prices to the total rejection of the Islamic Republic itself.
They explicitly demanded the end of the velayat-e faqih system, the fall of the clerics. The regime was looking at a united existential uprising.
So how does the theocracy respond?
With calculated brutality. Supreme Leader Khamenei authorized the full deployment of the IRGC and the Basij.
But first, they manipulated the BGP routing protocols and implemented a near-total internet blackout.
They turned the lights out so no one could broadcast the slaughter.
And under that digital blackout, they used heavy machine guns mounted on trucks, firing directly into unarmed crowds.
It was horrific.
This brings up the issue of the fog of war with our sources. When information is choked off, how do we quantify the human cost? The numbers are wildly divergent. We need to be totally objective here.
We do. Even the regime's own Security Council admitted to 3,117 dead, though they labeled them terrorists.
So the absolute baseline admitted by the state is over 3,000 dead citizens.
On the other side, independent human rights groups smuggled out verified documentation of over 7,000 fatalities.
And then there are higher estimates from exiled opposition groups.
Yes, suggesting the toll could soar past 30,000. It's crucial to state these higher figures are unverified. The regime wants the number low. Critics have a political motivation to project the highest possible toll.
The fog of war is thick. But the undeniable fact is the state slaughtered thousands of its own citizens to maintain power.
They cleared the streets by late January, but they permanently shattered whatever microscopic legitimacy they had left. The country was left deeply traumatized and seething.
Which perfectly sets the stage for March 18th, 2026. Weeks after massacring its own people, the state is plunged into a high-tech war with the U.S. and Israel.
And right at the height of this vulnerability, Khamenei dies, passing the crown to his untested son. It is a moment of supreme fragility.
Wow. Let's synthesize all of this. Through our topic lens today, we've looked past the headlines to see a nation defined by contradictions. An ancient, secularized population trapped inside a theocracy.
A theocracy guarded by a parallel military running out of water and now thrust into a direct war.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as your newsfeed updates today?
Consider this final thought. For 40 years, the regime built a sprawling web of foreign militias to protect itself from external threats. But in focusing entirely on the horizon, they catastrophically ignored the collapsing ground beneath their own feet.
They ignored the dried-up lakes and the desperation of their own citizens.
The ultimate irony might be that the greatest threat to the Islamic Republic's survival was never a foreign army. It was the thirst, hunger, and alienation of the Iranian people. As you watch this war unfold, ask yourself, can a government truly survive a massive external war when it is already fighting a war of survival against its own citizens?
That is a chilling, essential question. The fog of war is thick right now, but hopefully, looking through our topic lens at these deep historical and political mechanics, that fog has lifted just a bit for you today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep this context in mind, look past the headlines, and question the simple narratives as the tragic events of March 2026 continue to play out in real time.